The chamber was cold, an unyielding, clinical cold that mirrored the atmosphere within. Ava Morrow, human ambassador to the Galactic Federation, stood at the center of the vast, circular room, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the other representatives. There were over 50 species in the room, each seated on their intricately designed thrones, their eyes fixed on the round table where important decisions were made. Most of them had already formed their opinions, minds closed tight like the gates of a fortress. The whispers of diplomacy were gone. The time for words had ended. Ava had long grown accustomed to the alien gazes that scrutinized her every move. The discomfort, the subtle jeers, the dismissive glances, she had weathered it all for years. But today was different. Today, the stakes were higher. Her patience was fraying, and every passing moment seemed to stretch her resolve thinner. "Ambassador Morrow, please present humanity's proposal," came the cold voice of Supreme Chancellor Zorath, the oldest and most powerful being in the room. His reptilian eyes gleamed with an air of superiority. His species, the Zorathians, had existed for millennia, watching the rise and fall of countless civilizations. They held power, not by kindness or fairness, but by sheer force. Ava's proposal, the one that she had poured her heart into, had been ignored repeatedly by the Federation. But today, she had to present it again. Ava took a steadying breath, pushing her frustration to the back of her mind. The Federation had promised equality, shared governance, a place for all species in the galaxy. But all they'd given humanity were empty promises and backroom deals. They had sat in the shadows, watching, waiting. She had hoped for change, believed that humanity could make a difference, but that belief had been beaten out of her at every turn. "Thank you, Chancellor Zorath," Ava said, her voice calm, measured, but carrying the weight of years of frustration. "Today, we are here to discuss the future of humanity within the Federation. Our colonies are growing, our influence expanding. It is time to recognize the contributions of humanity to this great collective. We seek a seat on the High Council, to have a true voice in shaping the future of our galaxy." The other representatives shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. Ava knew they were already dismissing her words, mentally cataloging humanity as a nuisance rather than a legitimate force in the Federation. A few species, like the Volnari, had always been sympathetic to humanity's cause, but they were few and far between. The rest, well, they saw humanity as a mere footnote in galactic history. Zorath's eyes narrowed, his thin lips curling into a sneer. "And why, Ambassador, should humanity be granted this privilege? Your species has only recently learned to master space travel. You have much to prove before you can claim a place at the table." Ava's hand tightened around the tablet in her grip, but she held herself steady. "We've proven ourselves, Chancellor," she replied, her voice unwavering. "Humanity's progress has been nothing short of extraordinary. We've helped stabilize sectors in turmoil, brought peace where there was once war, and led efforts to find new resources for the Federation. We've already contributed more than some of the established species in this room." Zorath chuckled darkly, a sound that sent a chill down Ava's spine. "Contributions, yes, but they are not enough to warrant your position. What you fail to understand, Ambassador, is that this is not a meritocracy. The Federation exists to preserve power and balance, not to reward those who think they deserve more." Ava's heart skipped a beat. His words stung, but they weren't a revelation. This was the Federation's reality. Power, not progress, dictated the galaxy's future. Humanity had been nothing more than a pawn in their game, a small species that had shown promise, but was always kept at arm's length. She glanced around the room, hoping for some sign of support. But the other representatives were mostly silent, their faces unreadable. Only a few looked uneasy. Ava's stomach tightened. It was as she feared. They were content to let Zorath's iron grip continue. Ambassador Morrow, Zorath continued, his voice dripping with condescension. Your species is growing fast, yes, but growth comes with consequences. You seek a seat at the High Council, but what have you truly contributed that warrants such a position? Your resources are still limited, your influence barely felt beyond your borders. You are still children playing in a galactic playground you don't fully understand. The room erupted in murmurs, the other representatives eager to see what Ava would say. Ava's pulse quickened, but she fought to keep her composure. She couldn't let him provoke her. Not here. Not now. She took another breath, pushing past her growing frustration. Humanity's contributions are real, she said. We've advanced technology, medicine, and interspecies cooperation. If you continue to deny us a voice, you risk alienating the very species that could lead the Federation into the future. If we're kept in the shadows much longer, we may no longer wish to play by your rules. Zoratha's eyes flashed dangerously. Are you threatening us, Ambassador? Ava stood her ground. I'm stating a fact. You've underestimated humanity for too long. We have no intention of being sidelined any longer. If the Federation refuses to recognize our worth, we may have no choice but to seek alternatives. The words hung in the air, thick with tension. The room went deathly silent. Ava's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She knew she had just crossed a line, and that line could lead to consequences she wasn't prepared for. But humanity had reached its limit. They would not beg for recognition anymore. Zoratha's sneer faded, replaced by a mask of cold fury. He stood from his throne, towering over her, his eyes burning with unspoken threat. You are in over your head, Ambassador. Do not forget your place. Ava didn't back down. Perhaps it is you who have forgotten, Chancellor. Humanity's patience has run out. Zoratha's glare was like a knife. Then prepare for the consequences of your arrogance. The chamber grew still. The weight of the moment pressed in on her chest. She had said the words that had been building for years, words that had echoed in her mind every time she faced the Federation's indifference. But what came next? Would they listen? Would the galaxy recognize humanity's place? Or would they be pushed aside yet again? As the tension simmered in the room, Ava's resolve hardened. Today, humanity's patience had finally snapped. There was no turning back now. The corridors of the Galactic Federation Council building were eerily silent as Ava Morrow walked toward her private office, her footsteps echoing off the cold, polished floors. The weight of the last meeting pressed heavily on her mind, each step a reminder of the conflict that had escalated beyond diplomacy's reach. She had expected resistance, but Zoratha's dismissive tone, his cold, calculated dismissal of humanity's place in the galaxy, had crossed a line she could no longer ignore. As she passed by groups of alien ambassadors engaged in quiet conversations, she couldn't help but notice the occasional sideways glance, the hushed whispers that followed her. They had all witnessed her confrontation with Zorath. Some would undoubtedly view her actions as foolish, an act of defiance that would only strengthen the chasm between humanity and the Federation. Others, however, might see it for what it was, a sign that humanity would no longer bow to the Federation's centuries-old power structures. Ava entered her office, the door sliding shut behind her with a soft hiss. The moment she was alone, she allowed herself a long, ragged breath. Her hands trembled, but only slightly. The frustration of being ignored, of seeing humanity's efforts dismissed time and time again, had reached its peak. She couldn't go back. Not after what she had said. Not after humanity had reached the breaking point. Her console blinked to life as a message flashed across the screen. It was from Lieutenant Commander Ryan Blake, the head of her security team. The message was short and to the point. We need to talk. I've got information on something you need to see. Ava's eyes narrowed. Blake had always been reliable, but she couldn't help but wonder what he had found. Could it be more evidence of the Federation's manipulation? Or was it something more personal? She quickly tapped a few commands, sending a response to Blake, requesting an immediate meeting. Minutes later, Blake arrived. Tall, with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude, he had been one of the few people Ava trusted implicitly since she had taken her post. As he stepped into her office, his face was grim, his usual stoic demeanor replaced with something else. Concern, maybe even fear. "What is it, Blake?" Ava asked, her voice low, careful. She didn't need another complication right now. Blake didn't waste time. "It's about the Federation's latest move. I've been tracking the communications from the High Council's inner circle. There's a vote coming up, and this one's going to decide more than just a seat at the table. They're planning to cut off humanity's access to vital resources from the Farley sector: food, minerals, fuel. It's a full-scale blockade in all but name." Ava's heart sank. A blockade. If the Federation went through with it, it would be a devastating blow to humanity's colonies. And it would send a clear message: humanity wasn't welcome. "They can't do that," Ava muttered, though she knew they could. The Federation had the power, and they weren't afraid to use it. Zorath had always preferred to keep humanity on the edge, never fully integrating them into the power structure, always treating them as outsiders. This was simply another attempt to tighten their grip. Blake shook his head. "I'm afraid they can't, Ambassador. This has been in the works for months. It's not just a punishment for your words in the council chamber. It's a calculated move to cripple humanity's growth. They want us to bow to their demands, to show that they control the galaxy, not us." Ava stood up, her fists clenched by her sides. She had seen the writing on the wall, but this was something else entirely. The Federation had never been this blatant in their tactics before. They were willing to starve entire colonies, to condemn thousands, perhaps millions, of human lives, just to maintain their power. Blake's voice cut through her thoughts. "There's more. A few of the other ambassadors, those sympathetic to humanity's cause, are speaking out. But they don't have enough support. Zorath and the others are already swaying votes." Ava exhaled sharply. "We need to act fast. We can't let them do this." Her mind raced as she thought of the next steps. A diplomatic approach would be useless. Humanity had already made its case, and Zorath had shown no interest in negotiation. If they didn't take immediate action, their colonies would suffer, and worse, humanity's standing in the Federation would be irreparably damaged. Ava's eyes turned steely, a resolve hardening inside her. "I'll call a meeting. We need to rally our allies, every human leader with influence we can muster. If the Federation thinks we'll back down, they're mistaken." Blake nodded, a flicker of hope passing through his eyes. "I'll prepare the security protocols. We'll need to act discreetly. The Federation's eyes are on us now, and they won't hesitate to retaliate if they catch wind of what we're planning." Ava turned toward the large viewport in her office, gazing out at the stars. For years, she had walked the fine line between diplomacy and power. She had believed in the Federation's promise of equality, convinced that humanity's patience would win the day. But that belief had been shattered in that cold chamber, beneath the oppressive gaze of Zorath and his allies. Humanity had waited long enough. She turned back to Blake. "Get the message out to the leaders. I'll need all their support. It's time to take humanity's future into our own hands." Blake didn't hesitate. He nodded firmly and left the room, the door sliding shut behind him. Ava stood alone in her office for a long moment, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her chest. She had known that diplomacy wouldn't last forever, but she hadn't expected it to snap so violently. Now, there was no turning back. If the Federation wanted to play this game of power, then humanity would play it better. She glanced at the console again. More messages had arrived, but none of them held her attention. They were all distractions. It was time to shift the narrative. Time to make her move. The Federation had underestimated humanity's resilience. And now, they would learn just how far humans were willing to go to defend their future. Ava Morrow wasn't just an ambassador anymore. She was a leader, and she was ready to fight. As Ava left her office and headed toward the meeting room, her mind was clear. The Federation had crossed a line, but they hadn't realized what that meant. Humanity's patience had been a gift, one that had just run out. Now, they would see what happened when that patience snapped. Ava Morrow stood at the center of the council chamber, the hum of conversation around her fading into a dull murmur. The room was filled to capacity, as it always was when critical decisions were about to be made, but today, the air was different. Today, the tension was thick enough to slice through. The eyes of the galaxy's most powerful beings were fixed upon her, waiting for the final move. She had spent the last week rallying humanity's allies, meeting with leaders from colonies, military commanders, and influential figures. The message had been clear. Humanity's voice would no longer be ignored. Ava had convinced enough supporters to create a united front, but she knew this wasn't a simple vote. It was the moment that would determine humanity's future in the Federation. Zorath sat in his customary seat at the far end of the room, his reptilian eyes watching her with an unreadable expression. Ava could almost feel the weight of his gaze, as if the mere presence of the Supreme Chancellor was a silent warning. Today, he would find out just how far humanity was willing to go. The doors of the chamber slid open with a soft hiss, and the final delegates filed in. Some were familiar, others were new faces she had only just met in the days leading up to this moment. The Volnari, the Nixians, the Solari, their representatives had all pledged their support, but it was the Zorathians who would hold the power. Ava's gaze lingered on the throne of the Supreme Chancellor. He was still the master of the room, the embodiment of everything that humanity had struggled against for so long. Ava's hands were steady, but inside, her pulse raced. This was it, the culmination of everything she had worked for, everything humanity had fought for. The Federation had pushed them to this point, and now they would see what happened when patience ran out. The sound of the chamber's main door shutting reverberated through the room. Ava stepped forward, taking her place at the center of the council table, facing the gathered delegates. She took a deep breath, scanning the faces before her. There were species she had learned to respect, others she had grown to distrust. But one thing was clear, humanity was no longer the underdog. "Delegates of the Galactic Federation," she began, her voice calm but filled with quiet authority. "Today, we face a decision that will determine the future of this galaxy. The vote that lies before us isn't just about a seat at the High Council. It's about recognizing humanity's rightful place in the Federation." A murmur rippled through the room. Ava could feel the weight of her words settling into the minds of the delegates. Some of them were still hesitant, unsure if this was a fight worth taking. Others, like the Volnari and Solari, nodded, their eyes bright with determination. But Zorath remained unmoving, his gaze locked onto her with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. She continued, her voice steady. "For too long, humanity has been treated as a secondary species. We have contributed more to this Federation than any of you are willing to acknowledge. We have shared our resources, offered our expertise, and brought stability to countless sectors in turmoil. And yet, time and time again, we are dismissed. We are excluded from the very decisions that shape our future." Ava's words echoed in the chamber, and she felt the eyes of every representative upon her. She could see it in their expressions. Some were uneasy, others uncertain. But there were a few who were nodding along, their understanding apparent. The time for words was gone, though. They needed to see action, not just hear promises. "I stand here today not just as an ambassador," she continued, her voice growing stronger, more resolute, "but as a representative of humanity. a species that will no longer tolerate being silenced. We will no longer beg for a seat at the table. We will take our place, whether you like it or not." The room was deathly silent now. Ava felt the eyes of Zorath burning into her, but she didn't waver. The Federation had played its games, pulling strings behind closed doors, manipulating alliances, and bending the rules to maintain control. But no more. The time for diplomacy was over. Humanity was done playing by their rules. Zorath's cold voice broke the silence. "You overestimate your position, Ambassador," he said, his words dripping with disdain. "You speak of contributions, of humanity's worth, but you forget the reality. The Federation was built to maintain order, not to cater to the whims of upstarts. Your species may have potential, but that does not mean you deserve to dictate terms to the rest of us." Ava's jaw clenched. There it was, the same condescending tone, the same attempt to belittle humanity, the same power play. She had heard it all before. But now, she was no longer the diplomat pleading for recognition. She was the leader of a species that had been pushed to its limit. "No, Chancellor," Ava replied, her voice unwavering. "What you fail to understand is that humanity's patience has run out. We have waited. We have bided our time, believing in the principles that the Federation claims to uphold. But what have we received in return? The exploitation of our resources, the undermining of our progress, the denial of our right to a voice in the very decisions that affect our future." Zorath's eyes flickered, a momentary flash of something, fear maybe. Or perhaps it was recognition. Ava wasn't sure, but it was there, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his armor. The Zorathian leader stood, his gaze fixed on her with a newfound intensity. "You speak of patience?" Zorath sneered. "But you have no idea what true power is. You are nothing but a child playing at politics, and your reckless actions will have consequences." Ava met his gaze with unflinching resolve. "And if those consequences are the only way to finally be heard, then so be it." The room was still, the tension palpable. The delegates were watching, waiting for the next move. It was clear now, this wasn't just a vote. This was the moment that would define the future of humanity's place in the galaxy. Ava turned to the rest of the council, her voice rising with a quiet, fierce determination. "Humanity has no intention of bowing to the Federation any longer. We will not be silenced. We will take our place, not by begging for it, but by demanding it." The room erupted in chaos. Some representatives stood in support, while others voiced their objections. Ava could see the conflict unfolding before her. The Federation's carefully crafted illusion of unity was crumbling, and she was the one holding the hammer. Zoratha's face twisted with fury. "You dare!" "Yes, I dare!" Ava cut him off. "Humanity dares to fight for its future." And with that, the die was cast. The Federation's carefully constructed world was about to unravel, and humanity would lead the charge. There would be no turning back from this point. The storm had broken. Ava Morrow could feel it in every breath she took as she paced back and forth in her private quarters, the sounds of the Federation's High Council meeting still ringing in her ears. The debates, the accusations, the stirring of rebellion. She had done it, humanity had done it, but now there was no going back. What had begun as a diplomatic effort to gain equality within the Federation had escalated into an outright war of wills. Her mind raced, each thought bouncing between the ramifications of the past hour and the strategic decisions that had yet to be made. She could already hear the Federation's responses echoing in her thoughts, the threats, the denials, the calls for humanity to fall back in line. But there was no falling back now. The Federation's grip on the galaxy had been cracked, and she was standing at the epicenter. Ava's patience had snapped, and with it, the delicate balance that had kept humanity in check for so long. But now, the Federation would see a new side to humanity, the one that had been waiting, patient, and silent for far too long. She had taken a risk. The next few days, even hours, would determine whether humanity would be annihilated or finally given the respect it had been denied for so long. She had no illusions. There was no guarantee that this wouldn't turn into a war. But that was a risk she had been willing to take. The Federation's betrayal had left her with no choice. Ava stood by the large viewport, gazing out at the stars, the cold expanse of space reminding her of just how vast the universe was. The stars were the same, no matter who governed them. It was the same sky humanity had gazed upon for centuries, back when they had been nothing but a fledgling species, uncertain of their place. Now, they had carved their place into the galaxy. But the question remained, could they hold it? Her console buzzed, the sudden sound cutting through the silence like a knife. She hesitated, then walked over to answer it. It was Ryan Blake, her most trusted ally and lieutenant commander of her security detail. "Ambassador," Blake's voice came through, low and tight. "We've got movement." Ava's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of movement?" "Federation ships. They've just been mobilized. The word from the High Command is that they're preparing for a blockade around the Farley sector. They're moving fast. I think they're about to cut off the supply lines, and they're sending forces to the outer colonies." Ava's blood ran cold. The Federation wasn't wasting any time. Zoratha's words from earlier rang in her ears. "You overestimate your position." He admitted, hadn't he? They were coming for humanity. "How long?" Ava demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. "Maybe 12 hours. Maybe less. We don't know yet if they'll make it to the colonies in time, but they're preparing for something bigger." Ava exhaled, forcing herself to stay calm. "Get the fleet ready. I'll assemble the leaders now." She cut the transmission, her mind already racing through contingencies. The Federation would try to choke humanity's resources, cripple them before they could mount any kind of resistance. This wasn't just about blocking supplies anymore. It was an open declaration of war. Ava had prepared for this possibility, even though part of her had hoped it would never come to this. Humanity couldn't stand by while the Federation strangled their colonies. She had made her decision. Now she had to see it through. She tapped her wrist console, activating the communication channels that linked her to the human leaders she had rallied. Within moments, the faces of the most influential leaders of humanity's colonies appeared on the screen, each one lined up and ready to respond. Ava didn't mince words. "The Federation is moving against us," she said. "I just received confirmation that ships are en route to block the Farley sector, and they're mobilizing to attack our colonies. We don't have time. We need to act, and we need to act now." The leaders nodded in grim understanding. They knew the stakes. They had seen what the Federation was capable of, and now they were about to witness just how far humanity was willing to go to protect its future. "We have already placed the military on alert," General Lorraine Peters of the Mars Defense Fleet said, her face hard, her voice full of determination. "But we're going to need more than just ships. We need a coordinated strike, or they'll overwhelm us before we can retaliate." Ava nodded. "I'm not looking for a prolonged battle. We have to show them we are ready to fight, but not just with ships and weapons. Our strength lies in our unity. We need to send a message, loud and clear." The screen flickered as Adrian Solis, the governor of Titan Colony, leaned in. "What are you suggesting, Ambassador?" "We strike the Federation's supply lines first. Take out their staging points, cripple their resources, and leave them vulnerable. It'll be enough to force them to the negotiating table. We're not fighting for territory. We're fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy. We fight smart, and we fight together." There was a pause, as the leaders considered her words. It wasn't a simple plan. It would take precision, coordination, and an incredible amount of trust. But Ava saw the change in their eyes. They were ready. "We'll need full cooperation from the fleet," Commander Zarek of the Europa colonies said, his face flickering on the screen, his dark eyes burning with the same intensity Ava felt. "But we'll do it." Ava's pulse quickened. It was the first time humanity had truly acted as one. Zorath had thought them fractured, weak, but now they were unified. The Federation's move had forced their hand, but it had also brought them together. "Then we move," Ava said, her voice steady. "We strike fast. We make them fear us." The transmission ended, and Ava stood in the quiet of her quarters for a long moment. She had made the decision that would either secure humanity's future or seal their fate. There was no middle ground now. She had spent years fighting for diplomacy, for peace, for unity. But the galaxy had forced her hand. The Federation had shown their true colors, and now humanity would respond in kind. They had been patient. They had been silent. But now they would fight, not just for survival, but for respect. For a future in the galaxy that would not be defined by subjugation. Ava moved to the window, looking out once more at the stars. "This is for humanity," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is our time." The fleet assembled. Ships of all shapes and sizes, designed for both speed and endurance, prepared to move into the heart of the Federation's chokehold. Ava watched from the command deck of the flagship, her mind still processing everything that had transpired. Her heart raced as the countdown began. The Federation had underestimated humanity. They had underestimated her. And now, humanity would fight back.